The nation has made a policy decision, not that they're going to say people didn't do things, but that it's better for their country to go through reconciliation. That doesn't mean that the prosecutor could not. What it means is the prosecutor has the discretion not to, for him to take an action to prosecute, would somehow not be in furtherance of justice. And so I think that when there are national solutions that look like they're working reasonably well, that look like they aren't really just a sham to let somebody at the top get off, the prosecutor will defer and say, let's let those things take place. The second thing is that if the Security Council is going through a process where they think they can bring peace to some place without there being a prosecution, there's a deferral system that when the Security Council by a majority vote says not to prosecute it, you deferred for 12 months, which can be repeated however many times it takes. And so if the Security Council makes a decision that they don't want the prosecution to go forward ever, they could keep making those 12-month deferrals. So I don't think there's really a conflict. I think they can both be reconciled and go together.
Yeah.
When you guys were talking, you guys were referring to individual person who commits a crime. My question is, if it's a nation or it's a more than just one individual, how does the ICC trial that nation? For example, the only example I can think of is Rwanda incident, where the United Nations took forever to take any action to send people in and to stop the genocide that was happening. For the ICC, I know it's there to prosecute, but how are they going to help to stop the situation? Like, how are they going to, what action are they going to take to intersect what's going on and stuff like that? And you guys are saying that they're independent of the United Nations. My curiosity is, how independently are they from the United Nations? Because I don't think that's possible for them to be extremely independent of each other.
Well, for example, the International Red Cross is independent of the United Nations. It's a separate organization. The International Criminal Court is a separate organization. It is independent of the United Nations. For criminal liability or responsibility, according to the International Criminal Court, it will only be for individuals. So you will look to the leaders to find the individuals who are the most culpable, the most responsible for the misconduct that's occurred. There won't be a nation being tried, and there won't be corporations or businesses. It will only have individuals who are being tried. So to hold a nation responsible is not something that the ICC will do. What they will say is, someone was acting really not in the interest of their nation, but instead doing something that's against international law. And as far as I'm concerned, to act against international law is very rarely, if ever, in the interest of any nation. And so we're going to hold those individuals who acted in that way responsible. I really think there's an interesting issue that deals with what the responsibilities are that come with sovereignty, and whether or not, if you're a sovereign who engages in this type of conduct, you no longer have the privileges of a waiver that come with sovereignty, that by engaging in this kind of conduct, you no longer have that waiver that would come with being a sovereign. And that's a privilege that other countries give sovereigns. But I think that with that goes the responsibility to take care of your people, and when you're actually acting against their best interest, you may actually lose that privilege of not being prosecuted.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things to that. I mean, you're on to the sort of key issue here, which is the whole point of the International Criminal Court and the development of international criminal law is to focus these crimes back onto individual human beings, right? The sort of historical way of thinking about conflict between states and nations is, Germany invaded Poland in 1939, and in a sense it was the German nation that carried out that attack, even though, of course, Hitler ordered it and he had his generals and staff that worked for him. And, so the part of the entire project is to realize that when nations or corporations or any other group sort of carries out a plan like this, that ultimately means that there's individual human beings doing these acts, right? And if these particular acts, murder, forced transference of civilian populations, torture of prisoners, right? We can agree as an international community that these are so abhorrent that they should never take place, right? And the individuals responsible should be held accountable. Now, you also are touching on to another difficult political aspect of this, which is, if you have a commander, or a president, or a dictator, and his top, advisors and military echelon that order it, and then they have an entire command structure of, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of troops and personnel that are working for them, right? Who is it that you bring to the court in The Hague to hold accountable? And the language of the ICC statute is written in such a way as to make it clear that the focus is going to be on the people that are most responsible, or in effect the people with command authority. Now, it's possible to imagine a situation, right, where somebody at the field level, a very low-level commander, or even a private, might, take a prisoner out and execute them point blank without any instruction from above, right? And in that case, that person should be held accountable, and probably no one above them, right? But in the cases that we're more interested in, like the genocide of Rwanda, right? Even there, it was a very disorganized thing, right? There was no sort of command structure where the Hutus said, let's go out and kill the Tutsis. Instead, there was a radio message broadcast, right? To say, Hutu brothers, go get your machete and, slaughter your Tutsi neighbor. And then hundreds of thousands of people went out and did that, right? Well, in that case, you would focus on, the owner of the radio station and the person who made the broadcast and, the people who tried to get that message out as being, in a sense, the most culpable, right? And that's sort of a recognition that any court operates with limited resources, right? The LA prosecutor's office or the Orange County prosecutor's office can't possibly prosecute every crime that takes place in LA County or Orange County, right? They choose their battles and decide what's going to sort of do the most for justice to, which individuals can we focus on that help establish the rule of law.
I have 4 different questions. First, you said that
That's one at a time.
earlier this year, the tribunal for the Khmer was set up, and you said the ICC is not trying that. So, which international court?
For Cambodia?
Yeah, Cambodia.
For Cambodia, it's going to be a hybrid tribunal that hasn't yet really been established. The agreement between the Cambodian government and the United Nations was reached, I believe, October 4th. It was at the beginning of this month. Until there was that agreement, donor nations weren't willing to give money to set up the tribunal. And it's
For the International Criminal Court at all.
Right, okay. The second question is, you mentioned that the ICC only steps in when the local or the court system of the states or the countries fail. So isn't that the case where if the United States has a credible, functioning, fair military court system, then why would they support the ICC if they have their own way of trying soldiers that commit, crimes? As we see in Abu Ghraib.
The reason the United States should support the court is not because they're thinking U.S. military will be held accountable, but instead because they want a system in place so that there will be accountability in other countries when those court systems fail. And so the U.S. should support this because in a situation like Cambodia, if that were to happen today, there would now be a court system that could take care of it, that would say, your leaders, if you're going to go out and do these kinds of things, you can be held responsible. There's still a problem about enforcement because there's not really any enforcement power. It's voluntary. And so unless someone went in and got the leaders, you wouldn't have custody of them. But the thought that they might be prosecuted should be a deterrent.
But I think, like always, the U.S. is going to protect their own soldiers before they worry about other criminals, right?
And they can do that in their own courts.
Okay,